All right, everyone. I have the top of the hour. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Thank you for joining us. My name is Chad Flowers. I am accompanied with Joseph Tucker for the management track of our Connect Pulse series that we've been doing this week. I don't know if some of you have been joining some of the other sessions that we've been putting on, but this is going to be the track dedicated towards management. And so what we're going to be focused on is, some themes and some ideas from a management perspective and how we can, mad dash into the year 2022. So we'll talk about that here in just a moment. Before we begin, just a little introduction from myself and Joseph. I'll throw it to him in a moment. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Chad Flowers. I've been with NextGear, oh gosh, it's been over 12 years at this point. I'm sure I've trained a good number of you on this call, for better or for worse. But yeah, I am a senior consultant, senior trainer on most of the software that we offer here at NextGear Solutions, and I couldn't be more excited to be a part of our session today. I'm going to give Joseph a moment here to introduce himself, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Hey everyone, name is Joseph Tucker. I've probably, like Chad, worked with a lot of you in some capacity. I was previously worked with all of our independent customers. Now work with some of our large franchises, helping them improve processes as well as adoption of our QA Assist product. Very excited to get to present to you today.
Beautiful. Okay, so the theme that we are going with through all of these pulse sessions has been a mad dash to 2022. And when I initially heard that topic, the idea that I had was, how do I get ready for the new year? And that inevitably came to kind of a resolution, New Year's resolution type theme. And so instead of focusing on one specific issue or multiple issues that some of you may be experiencing to try to address, I wanted to take a step back from that and focus more on, well, how can I identify as management? How do I identify what needs to be fixed? And how do I go about implementing a plan to address it? So we can use examples, and we'll have opportunities for some Q&A a little bit later. But I really want to focus on, how do we identify what areas need to be addressed inside of the organization, and then what approaches we can take to go about doing that, right? So the biggest question that we need to address first and foremost is, what problem needs to be fixed the most? And there's a lot of different ways that you can go about addressing that, right? Hopefully you've got some sort of a system, because I know not everybody on this call is a NextGear client. Welcome to all of you. But you need to be able to identify what's going on inside of your organization before you can properly address those items that need to be fixed. So what tools, what methods, what information is available to you to be able to go about and do that? And so the big question that comes up, what tools can you use? And we're actually going to take a moment here to actually go into a client's database. And I'm going to poke around, and Joseph's got some ideas as well on how you can use, and we're going to be using Dash for this example because that's the program that we're most familiar with. How can I go through a database so I can first and foremost identify what potential issues that we may have? Because I have to use the data that's at my disposal to make those decisions. Hopefully you've got data that you can use, and we're going to try to point you in some directions that you can go about using that. But we're going to use Dash specifically to identify what are some areas that could be of concern for this client that we're going to be looking at, that they can take away and maybe start investigating for, in hopes of implementing this for the beginning of the new year. So let me exit out of this PowerPoint. We'll come back to it for some other slides in a few minutes. And we're going to be talking specifically some of the reporting opportunities that we have here inside of Dash. Now, if you've got questions on how do I access these areas of the application, let's hold those questions for the end of our session, because I don't want to spend time trying to locate and kind of train on the application. But these are all screens that you can find inside of Dash. And so what we're looking at right now is the altitude page that is found inside of Dash. And there's a few things that I'm always looking for, like Joseph mentioned. We've been consulting on this application for years. And so one of the first pages that we always like to go to is this screen because of how easy it is to process information if you know what you're looking for, right? Having good data is imperative to making good decisions. So for example, some of the things that I'm looking for when I come to an altitude page are things like this: pending sales, right? If for those of you that are not familiar, a pending sale is a job that we haven't sold yet. But the database that we're currently in right now, they've already invoiced over $1,900 worth of work that are jobs that are supposed to be not even sold yet. So that would be an immediate red flag for me in terms of data collection for this organization. Another thing that's a big thing that I look for in terms of estimate collection, let's look at the accounts receivable section. So for those of you that are not aware, accounts receivable means that these are jobs that have been finished and we've already invoiced them in full. We're now trying to collect payment. But one thing that's sticking out to me is this organization has invoiced a little over $1 million, but they've estimated 1.1 million. And so we've got a roughly $55,000 gap between the estimated amount and the invoiced amounts. So my question would be, how does my accounting team know how much to invoice, right? Is there a process problem or a process breakdown that's not funneling through this application to where they know how much needs to be invoiced when time comes? Because I want to make sure that I'm able to track and monitor everything inside of my system of record, which in this case is going to be Dash. But according to the data that I'm seeing, there tends to be, or at least there seems to be, a breakdown in some sort of communication because this is not telling me the full story. And then if we go over into the waiting for final closure section right here, which once again is now telling us that we've been paid. We've estimated these jobs to be 105,000, but we've only invoiced 88,000. So there are some things that this client could be doing, assuming that we had to give discounts on these jobs or whatever that may be. But in terms of the numbers themselves and the data that's being represented here, I now have more questions than I have answers about what's going on in the organization. So now before I can address a problem, I have to even go back further to start investigating to make sure that the data is even accurate. And that's where we start getting into processes that we have inside of the organization, roles and responsibilities that people have inside of your organization. So being able to dig inside of your database to identify issues are going to help you figure out what problems I even need to begin addressing inside of my company. Okay, so that's one piece of information that you can look at. Another thing that you can look at is potential compliances, workflows that you're using on a job by job basis. I'm going to pull up a job here specifically, and I think this is something that Joseph wanted to touch on. And Joseph, I'll throw it over to you if you want to give me some direction on where I need to go inside of the job here. Feel free.
Yeah, so on the water mitigation job, scroll down and let's take a look at the completed compliance tasks. And so this is one of the first things that I look at. So when I'm working with a customer and we're doing this database audit, we start where Chad started, and that gives us the big picture. And then I like to back up and say, okay, how do we keep our data clean? What's the best way for us to be able to, one, solve those issues? Because now that we've diagnosed it, what's a quick solution or a quick step that we can take to start to resolve that? And so for me, the first thing is, how do we get to real-time data? How do we get information being input when it happens, as opposed to tracking down information? So as we look at that altitude page, we can see, okay, here are some areas that we could improve. Here are some breakdowns of the processes. Going back to the compliance task and how they're set up can help drive that. So for this water mitigation job, we have 5 compliance tasks. I am, a big fan of keeping it simple, not overtasking. We'll work with people that have 30, 40, 50 tasks, and maybe it works for them, but it also can become a lot of noise. Here's a good thing I see right away is that people are completing their compliance tasks, but I also see some opportunity to maybe work in additional tasks to fill those gaps. If we've got issues with our accounts receivable, how do we use compliance tasks to notify the right people that it's their time to act? How do we, track their progress? We can use compliance tasks for that as well. And so when we think about how do we address those issues, the first thing that we want to do is how do we gather real-time data in the field, enter that information then, and we're not waiting for people to get back to the office. We're not always playing catch up on when our data is entered. So if I'm looking for answers, I don't like that information might be in a folder somewhere waiting to get back to the office to be handed off to someone for them to go in and enter it. How do we keep those breakdowns from happening? And so this is a good way if you are a Dash user to see, okay, where am I breaking down? Because I may see that there's a lot of these tasks that are rejected, and it may come with a description of completed outside the compliance task. Usually what that means to me, while there are opportunity or situations where that might be the case, what it generally means is that someone rejected the task and then did what they were supposed to do, but it was either late or they didn't want to have to do it in real time, so they waited to get back to the office. And so those are some things that I would take a look at to see, all right, I see a breakdown in the accounts receivable. I see a breakdown in the pending sales. Are there compliance tasks that solve that, and are my people using those? And this is a really good place to see that.
For sure, yeah. Do you have anything else you wanted to add, Joseph?
No, we're good there.
Yeah. So once again, the theme that we're going with right now is investigating, right? I am trying to use the information at my disposal to investigate what I perceive is already happening, to validate what I believe is already happening, but I have to have good information to be able to make the decision on what needs to be addressed inside of the organization. And one thing that I love about compliance is this is an opportunity for automation inside of your organization, right? The streamlining of communication between departments from coordinators to estimators to accounting, instead of me having to have that hand holding and the physical handing over of paper to someone, or having to remind myself to send an email to accounting to let them know that a job is completed, compliance can really allow me to take that step out of the equation, because the system's going to do that for me. I echo exactly what Joseph said. This is great that people are completing it, but I think there's still some meat that we can put on this process to add additional things, because the water job does not end with us uploading inspection photos, right? There's a lot of other components that we can be doing to this that can be tracked at minimum, right? To make sure that that's happening in the timeframes that are being expected of us from the partners that we're working with. But right now, we don't have that visibility potentially, or else it's a lot more manual to capture that information to be able to assess what's happening inside of the organization. Okay. All right, so another report that I want to bring us to, and this is actually a sub-report found inside of Altitude. This is the reason for closing report. And one of my, probably I think one of the most powerful reports that we have inside of the application, just a little background about how this report works, is when you close a job inside of this application, you have to identify a reason why we're going to be closing that job. And so this is essentially just a statistical breakdown of why jobs are being closed, the value of those jobs, assuming that we have that information. But it's a really good picture as to why jobs are being closed inside of your organization. So a few things that I found interesting here when I was assessing this client's database. For example, we've got a job here, and we're looking at the current year, FYI. So we're looking at 2021. But let's say that we've got, the company's name is Bravo. So they were non-responsive to a job. That was 3 jobs worth almost $500,000. Maybe it would be good for me to do a postmortem on those to get a better understanding of what happened on those losses, because $500,000 is nothing to sniff at. 61 jobs where the client was non-responsive. That was almost $1 million worth of work. Now, obviously, we can't make clients respond to us, but maybe I would want to reassess the efforts that we make, the process that goes into reaching out to a client that's non-responsive. How often are we making those efforts to reach out to the client? Are we documenting those conversations? Because once again, people called us at least with the opportunity to do work. And 61 times we indicated that the client was non-responsive, and we estimated the minimum that those jobs were worth was almost $1 million. So at minimum, it's just double checking to make sure that there's not opportunities that we're missing out, not just to secure that work, but as there are processes that we can put in place to ensure that next year, when the same things happen potentially, we have a better closing ratio on that work. Another thing, client chose another contractor. Another set of jobs worth almost $1 million. What could we be doing differently to make them choose us compared to going with one of our competitors, right? Once again, having that data at our disposal allows us to make more informed decisions about what's actually happening inside of the organization.
One thing I'll add here, Chad, is the whole theme of this is getting ready for 2022 and setting goals and understanding, how do we hit those goals. And one thing that I get a lot when I'm working with customers is we want to grow. Maybe we've got an X percentage, right? We want 10% growth. We want 5%, 20%, whatever that growth target is. Oftentimes, the ways that we think that we can get to those are, okay, we need more salespeople, we need more relationships, we need to be more efficient, we need to take the jobs that we have and be able to save a little bit of money on them. And one of the lower things on the list is, what about the jobs that we lost? And do we understand why we lost them, and what can we do? Because if I'm looking at this and saying, okay, year to date, we're already over 4 million in lost jobs, could I get to my goal by being 50% better here, 10% better here, or how much of my goal could I reach? And so this is something to keep in mind as we're setting goals, that there could be a lot of what I need to hit that already in the pipeline that we're losing. And do I understand why we're losing it? And do I have a plan for those? So just be thinking about that as we're setting targets, and we'll get into the next phase of this, of how we're going to set those, measure those, and achieve those. That this is a really important thing to understand and make sure you've diagnosed and have a plan for.
For sure. A lot of people focus on getting the phone to ring more, but for a lot of cases, you're already having the phone ring enough. It's just a matter of securing the work that's coming in that can really be effective to you. Some other reports that I like to frequent, and Joseph likes to frequent as we're going through are kind of assessments and reviews on angles that we can take for improvement. So what we're looking at right now, this is a page called the Business Development Dashboard. And some of you, I don't know the size of everyone on this call, but just because you don't have salespeople, some of us may not have a sales team, this is still a valuable page for you. Because at minimum, you need to be tracking where you're getting your calls from, who is referring us work. An immediate red flag, 919 jobs are missing referral sources. That is not necessarily this year. In full disclosure about this database, and actually they've done a pretty good job this year alone capturing those. This is the entire history of their database, but this is always something that we want to monitor to ensure that we are capturing referral sources. And then if we scroll down, one of the benefits of capturing that data is being able to look at information like this. Who are our top 10 referral sources inside of the organization? And we can actually look at that from a number of different criteria. For example, the volume of work that we're getting. So a bulk of their work is from Crawford. So 154 losses this year from Crawford. Now, that does not necessarily mean that they secured the work and got paid on it. That just means that they got a referral from that source. 57 from Google, so on. And then as you move left to right, we get a little bit more specific in terms of the criteria that is showing up on these graphs. From an invoice perspective, you still have Crawford, closed, collected, and then from a gross profit perspective, which for me is the number that means the most, how profitable were the losses being sent to us from certain sources. So once again, Crawford is making up at least half or almost half of the profit that they've received this year alone. And then the next biggest is Lionsbridge. So one immediate thing that I would point out to this owner is, we've got a lot tied into program work, right? That's looking at, almost 2/3 of the work from a gross profit perspective this year coming from programs. Is that a business model that you want? It may be. Some people prefer to do primarily TPA work, which is certainly their prerogative. But that's at least something I want to point out, because some people get a little uncomfortable with being so tied up in program work. They want to diversify. That way, if something happens on a program and they decide to go another route, that's not going to take a large percentage of our jobs away. So that would be some piece of data that I would want to look at, or at least acknowledge, to make a determination if that's a trend that I want to continue, or if there's something that I want to shake up a little bit. Now, the next few reports that we're going to be looking at is from our BI section. I don't know if everyone on this call uses BI, but we will have the opportunity to get some feedback if some of you are interested in BI. This is an add-on that you can bring into your database, but this allows you to take your data and really do what you want with it. You have a lot of customization as it relates to the information that I'm about to start showing you. One of which, for example, is kind of an extension of that referral data that we were looking at just a moment ago. And so we're focused on this year, jobs missing referred by. So there are 20 jobs this year that are missing a referral source. The value of those jobs are $224,000. A few things to point out here. I don't know that my salespeople are being properly compensated, which means I may not be able to properly assess my salespeople if I don't have these types of numbers in place. Also, from a marketing perspective or a sales plan perspective, how do I know how effective certain verticals are being if I am not properly attributing where these jobs are coming from? So this is just a piece of data that I can use. And once again, this is the BI component that allows you to take any of this data that you're capturing and put it in a graph form, if that's something that makes it easier for you to digest the information that you are trying to process here. Another report that I found interesting, and this is an aging report that has been built. How many jobs do we have balances on that are 0 to 30, 30 to 60, 60 to 90, 90 plus? And so this is a huge red flag for me, is we're sitting at over $1.5 million that are over 90 days old. And so that's where we start also looking at what are our processes for follow-up calls, lien rights. This just once again opens up the opportunities on how we can improve, because this is obviously something that I want to try to address if I have that type of exposure out there that's just been sitting for longer than 3 months. And if you scroll down, you can actually get into the details. Once again, this is a huge benefit of having the BI tool at your disposal, is being able to build things like this, where I'm easily able to process this information without having to go through the rigmarole of exporting to an Excel spreadsheet, create my own pivot table, which some of you may be very proficient at. But being able to click a button and pull it up, I find to be, much easier, if you ask me. So another powerful piece of information that you can take just by having some of that data available to you inside of this application. This is a report that I specifically wanted created for our session today. Cycle times, right? Cycle times are something that we should always be monitoring, just due to the requirements that a lot of our carrier partners are expecting of us. I know a lot of us do TPA work in some capacity, which means that we have time milestones that we have to make sure that we're hitting for certain items. And so this is data that can allow me to see where I may potentially have room for improvement. So for example, time to inspect. On average, how long does it take us to indicate that we've inspected a property? And we've got this broken down by employees. So 18 days for this person, 124 days for this person. Now, I don't have any context behind the data that we're looking at, but at minimum, this is an exploration point for me to see, okay, that makes sense why this happened or why this didn't happen. At minimum, it's a red flag for me to begin investigating, so I can start digging to see if this is really an issue in terms of we're not performing to the standards that are expected of us, or it's an issue with data collection, which, as long as you're performing, I guess that's a good part, but we want to clean up the data collection part. So at minimum, you're able to really diagnose what's happening inside of your organization. Oh, and yes, I apologize. These are hours, not days. So 18 hours, 124 hours here. So my apologies. Yeah, this is hours, not days there on this particular chart. Time to signing, time in days from date received to a work authorization. We've got time to contact. How long is it taking us to make that initial contact with the client? Time to start. How fast are we able to start jobs? And of course, if I wanted to, I could filter this down by reconstruction only or just mitigation. You'll have that flexibility here inside of the BI tool. But once again, being able to look at my data in a different way can really allow me to diagnose a little bit easier what's potentially going on inside of my organization. We've also got time to complete. How fast are we completing our jobs once we start it? On average, how many days is it taking us to complete a job? And then how long is it taking us to invoice? In the grand scheme of things, 4 days is not bad. But I think there's room to improve there, right? 1 to 2 days is a standard that we try to set from a consulting perspective, especially on the reconstruction side. 1 day is kind of the standard that we expect. So maybe there is room for improvement within the jobs that are making up this graph and what our expectations are internally from an organization perspective. And then finally here, time to final payment. On average, how many days is it taking us from that final invoice going out to that final payment? So this is once again just giving you the opportunity to, at minimum, investigate what's going on in your organization to see if there are any things that stand out, so you can start assessing, hey, these are some things that some new initiatives that I want to put forward going into the new year. All right. Last little chart that I'll show you. This is just another kind of example of how powerful BI can be. Gross profit by referral source. So kind of tagging on to that sales data that we were looking at a little while ago, right? Knowing what my profit margins are by referral source, that can also help me get a plan in place for my sales team for next year. Right? We are not hitting our expectations when it comes to agents and brokers, but we want to focus more on them or property managers. Maybe we want to look at commercial real estate, whatever the scenario may be. Just having this type of data at my disposal can really make my decision making a lot easier as I'm going through that investigatory phase. Okay. But once again, BI, and I believe, and we'll verify this toward the end, but I believe a lot of these BI reports that I'm showing you are going to be made available to everyone on this call that already has the BI portal. We'll confirm that a little bit later on in our session here, but I believe we are going to be making a vast majority of these BI reports available to all the attendees, assuming you already have the BI module. Okay. Now, the only other thing that I would point out, I don't have any visual to show you about this database, but another thing that I picked up when I was doing my investigation inside of this database is this company's currently not using work orders for their reconstruction losses. And so one thing or one important data point that can be missing now because they don't have that is, what is our budgeted versus actual when it comes to profitability on those losses, right? So if I don't have any idea how much we expect to make before that job begins, then I don't really know if we're hitting that target when I'm seeing the actuals come in, right? So that would be another thing that I would point out to this owner, that, this is at least an opportunity that you can explore. And now's a good time to start getting ready for that, because you only have, 2 months before the new year begins. If you wanted to take on the work order piece, now would be the time to start getting training and processes in place so that can take hold once the new year gets here. So once again, it's all about just going into your database and having data at your disposal, wherever you're getting your data from, to be able to assess what's happening or what's not happening inside of your organization, so you can start making plans for improvement. Okay. So with that being said, let's transition back to our PowerPoint and let's start talking about some different methods that we can use to start setting those goals that we're going to have for the new items that we may want to implement inside of our organization. So if you'll give me just a moment, I'm going to pull up our slideshow again. Now, before we start getting into goals, I want you to kind of do a self-reflection real quick. So we spent some time going through some data. And, the database that we were looking at had relatively good data, at least compared to what I see in my travels and times consulting clients on their database. But what you need to ask yourself right now, if I were to direct you to go and look at a lot of those same reports that I was showing you on your screen, how comfortable and confident would you be able to be to know that I could make business decisions off of that data that I'm seeing? Or would it be more of a, well, at minimum, I know that I need to do better about using Dash, right? So these are some general categories that you can put yourself in. Hopefully, a lot of us find ourselves in the data driven, where we are using data to shape and evaluate your business decisions. But in my experience, a lot of us are going to find ourselves in these other three. But just assess yourself and have an understanding of where we are, because remember that you're not going to be able to make a lot of the decisions about what you really need to improve upon unless you have actual tangible data to be able to make those decisions. Now, one other thing, since we have management on this call specifically, another thing that I want to talk about regarding bad data is the cost associated to that. So I want to pull up this chart, and you've probably seen this before in some of the other presentations that we've done, but I like to keep using it because it really drives home a point: the cost of bad data. So I like to apply the 1-10-100 rule when it comes into data. First and foremost, there's a prevention cost. This is verifying a contact record, auditing. That costs 1 unit, right? So I have one person that goes through, they make sure that the data that we're collecting is accurate. Now, when we start having to go through and correcting that cost, the cost goes up tenfold. So a correction cost, cleansing and deduplicating records, that's going to cost us 10 units more because of the resources that we're having to spend and the time that we're having to spend going back through someone else's work and correcting it to make sure that it's accurate. And then we have the failure cost, working with records that are never cleansed, right? That leads us down rabbit holes of decisions that we don't really need to be made because there are more important decisions that need to happen inside of the organization, because the data that we have, as flawed as it is misleading us to think that there are bigger issues at hand. And so that is the true cost of having bad data inside of your organization. So I like to really put this in there to emphasize the importance of good data, because once again, it can affect the bottom line inside of your organization if you don't have a stranglehold on collecting it. Now, this next slide is just a visual to talk about, data means action, right? Now, this can go one of two ways. Good data means good action. Bad data, I don't know where that leads you, but once again, the better data that you have, the better opportunities you're going to have to make more educated, informed decisions about the direction that you're looking to take. Okay, so let's reset. So we've talked about the importance of data and how we can use our database to investigate, to discover what areas of the organization need to be addressed. So now that you have identified the issue, whatever that may be, and once again, this is not to get into specifics here because everybody may have different things that they want to address inside of their organization. Let's talk about the goal setting period now. Now that we've established what needs to be addressed, let's start getting into the process of developing goals around what we want to address. So I want us to keep it simple, and we want our goals to be smart. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is your goals need to be specific. What do I mean by that? Well, what do you want to accomplish? Okay, that's the first thing. Do I want to improve profit margins? Do I want to improve the data that we're collecting, the quality of the data that we're collecting? Do I want to improve cycle times? Okay, be specific about those. Do you want to cut down your time to invoice from 4 days to 2 days? Do you want to take our profit margins on the reconstruction side up to 45% from 35? Whatever that may be specific with it, okay? Then you're also going to need to establish who's involved with it. And do I have resources or limits with who's going to be involved? Okay, so those are some things that you want to start assessing first and foremost. You want those goals to be specific about what it's going to entail to your organization. The next thing that we need to be is measurable. So we have to be able to measure that in some capacity, because how else are you going to know if we hit our goal or not? Okay, so what reports are we going to use? Do I need to create my own report that I'm going to be looking at daily, weekly, monthly to assess if we are hitting that goal? Are you going to be able to trust those? Do you know that you have the structure and the infrastructure in place to be able to readily capture this information that is needed to be able to determine if we are progressing or if we are devolving with the goal that we are trying to set? And you may also need to establish auditors inside of your organization. And if you don't already have them, this is a good position to have inside of your organization, a compliance person to ensure the quality of data that's going into your database, just because of the amount of reports that are hopefully being used to make the decisions that are progressing the business. Achievable. Are the goals realistic that we are trying to set? Okay. How realistic is this goal? Have others been able to accomplish this? One thing that I've learned in my several years of being in this industry is, while we are by and large competitors to some extent, there is a real good community, and people are readily available to talk about, hey, we've tried this before, it didn't work. We did this, we've had success with it. What programs have we used? What reports do we use? What processes do we have in place? It's never a bad idea to reach out to someone in the restoration community to kind of, bend their ear and talk to them about things that they have attempted that may have worked for them or haven't worked. That can be a good gauge to determine if this is something that we can do inside of the organization, because then you can at least start comparing the number of people that they have, the resources that they have at their disposal. So it's never a bad idea to reach out to some of your partners in the industry to have an understanding of what they've done, what they failed at, what they've succeeded with, and use that as kind of a, yeah, this is something that we can do because I know others have done it as well. Okay. The other thing to think about is, are there other factors that may prevent this goal from being achieved? Do we have the technology in place? Do I have the people in place that are willing and able to be okay with change? Change is a huge component with a lot of what we're talking about. You have to have people that are adept to change and are willing to make that change because it may affect them. Next, we have relevant. Is this worthwhile? Is it the right time to do this? Does it align with the overall company goals and mission? Sometimes we have to just do that cost benefit analysis of, this is going to be way more trouble than it's worth inside of the organization due to different factors that are currently going on. You have to have your finger on the pulse of the organization. If you have a lot of turnover right now, maybe it is the time to implement this new process because these new people don't know any different. And so now is the time to start implementing what I want in place, because they're not already getting into the bad habits that some of the other staff, the legacy group, is already in. So now is the perfect time to implement this because of the turnover that we're having right now. So those are also things that you may want to go about assessing as you are going through this process. And then finally, time bound. You have to have time parameters around this. You don't want an open-ended goal that we're just going to keep looking at it until we hit it. We want to have a time frame in place that says, okay, by end of Q1, I want our cycle time on inspections to be under 12 hours or whatever that time frame may be. And we're going to say until Q1, we're going to be monitoring to make sure that happens. Okay. You also have to establish when this is going to start. What's going to be done first, second, third? How long till I start expecting results? So a few mistakes that I have seen made when it comes to change management implementing new initiatives inside of an organization, is you try to run two processes at once. At some point, you have to burn the boats, so to speak, whether you are making a commitment to Dash for 2022, and you're going to say, hey, we are going to quit, using paper for some things, Dash for other things. We are going to make a full commitment to Dash starting January 1, 2022. Okay, then you have to remove all of the other methods that people are using to circumvent Dash in this scenario. So they only have the option of using the application that you want them to, right? So, so that's one piece of advice there. Also, when that day comes that you want to start implementing this new process or tool, whatever that may be, the old method goes away when that new day gets there. That's why that time-bound component is so important, is because it sets a day on the calendar that says, okay, on this day, the new process begins. So you have until this time to get what you want in place, because on this day, the old way is going by the wayside. And so having those types of parameters in place can really help people get on board because they know what the expectations are. So that's just a good kind of methodology to follow when it comes with setting up your goals, is keep them smart. And so that's hopefully something that you can use to remind yourself as you're going through this process of assessing. Now, some other things that you can do. I've got some other examples that some people may have already done, but it never hurts to do these things again. As you are going through this assessment process and as you are exploring processes that need to be changed inside of your organization, here are some tips and some things that you can do if you haven't already done them that can really aid you in this process. Whatever the process is that you want to implement, it's always a good idea to have some of these other things in place. So I want to start with charting your organization. I don't know how many of you have org charts currently inside of your company. If you have some, maybe a good time to revisit those prior to the new year getting here, because charting your organization can do a lot of different things. It allows everybody to know what they're doing. What am I responsible for? One of the biggest issues that I've seen with implementations of Dash specifically is when it comes time to start using the application, it's kind of a free-for-all. People don't know what they're responsible for, who needs to do this, who needs to put this information in. And so what the owner sees is basically a lack of information inside of the program because no one knows what their responsibilities are inside of the application. So having that organization charted can make people know what their roles and responsibilities are. It can also allow people to know who they report to. Right? It allows people to cooperate more effectively because I know that this person reports to so-and-so, or if I report to so-and-so, that can help improve communication throughout the organization. And so that's a really important thing that I think every organization needs. And like I said, if you've already done this, if it's been a few years since you did it, it may be time to revisit that because you want to keep that fresh so everybody knows who reports to whom and what those jobs, roles, and responsibilities entail. And then I've just got an example of an org chart here. Once again, just kind of outlining who reports to whom, how all of that flows. Once again, that can be a very important visual to members of the team so they are able to see that. Now, another important thing that goes into goal setting and process changes is before you can change a process inside of your company, it really helps to know how things happen now. Process mapping is one of the first steps. So there was a period in time where I was spending a lot of my days and weeks working with clients to chart their existing processes inside of their company. It's really hard to fix what you don't know is going on. And so one of the best exercises that I can recommend for those of you that haven't done this is to map out your processes, how they're happening now. Because when I'm trying to assess what needs to be fixed, it's better to know what's broken. And so process mapping can provide that level of clarity inside of your company. Whether it is how does a reconstruction job go, or how does the collection process work? Getting a firm understanding of who does what, how do they do it? Is there a lot of back and forth that can be eliminated between that? That can be a really critical component of developing new processes and making changes inside of your organization, is by first mapping out how things exist today. For example, that company that we were looking at their database a moment ago, I kind of ended that with the fact that they're not using work orders. Okay, well, if I was advising this company and they wanted to start using work orders, well, the first thing that I would ask is, well, how do they do it now? So I would ask them, well, let's chart out your process now to get an understanding of how is your organization budgeting their jobs today. What does that look like? Because first we have to identify, well, what do we want to change first, second, third? Because sometimes it can be very difficult to make a full blanket change of a process. Maybe there could be some quick and easy wins with how they're doing things now that we can just flip a switch to get it over into Dash or whatever that process looks like. So having a firm understanding of what's happening now can really help you make assessments on what needs to be fixed. And a few other tips about process mapping here. Don't just talk to one person. Talk to every person in the chain of that, because believe it or not, a coordinator is going to have a different impression of how things operate than a technician will. So get the technician's version of how the process happens, then talk to the estimator, the coordinator, accounting, whomever. Talk to everybody inside of the process. That way, if they've got a different understanding, that's where you may be seeing breakdowns in communication, because everybody is not on the same page with how the process is being completed today. And here are just some basic benefits of process mapping that kind of just go about what I was talking about here. It really does help team involvement and morale when you are able to get everybody involved in potential process changes. I can't tell you the number of times that technicians have really beamed with excitement because they're getting to have a say in the process, because they can talk about their experiences. A lot of technicians feel like that they are low man on the totem pole, and that's because a lot of people see them that way. But that doesn't have to be the case. They're the face of our company when they go on site. So being able to have their voice in the process as we are determining what this new process will look like, how it's going to affect everybody inside of that chain, can really do wonders for improvement in morale inside of your company. Vague problems regarding, whatever, people having misconceptions about inside of a specific process about how this should be done or how it is done today, communication slip-ups. You can pinpoint where there could be some bottlenecks inside of specific processes. Like I also mentioned, it just allows you to see the big picture, right? How is this really happening, right? How efficient are we? If we were wanting to scale the company to be able to handle more business, take on more work, would we be able to do so with the current processes that we have in place now? So being able to see that big picture can be critical. Trimming unnecessary steps. Can we be more efficient because we are able to do this process mapping and see that, hey, there's a lot of inefficiencies here. I've got one person doing so many redundancies inside of the organization, when we can just cut 2 or 3 things out to make it easier for everyone involved. I mentioned the new employee training perspective. That's critical. We can have a new person start with the way that we want to do it from the get-go, instead of having them learn all the bad habits that everyone else is associated with now. And then finally, it just allows you to circulate best practices throughout the organization. So at a minimum, if you are kind of struggling, you don't have good data inside of your organization, and you are really struggling to find what processes you want to potentially change, maybe start here. Chart out your organization. go through some process mapping inside of your company, because once again, it's all about knowing what needs to be addressed before you can address it. And whether that's going through a database to find specific data points that you want to try to improve, which is always a good thing. Some of us may not be to that point yet. And we have to take a step back and have a better understanding of what's going on inside of the organization. And that can be accomplished by going through, charting out the organization, and mapping out all of the existing processes that we have inside of the company today. Okay. And so now what I want to do is, I've done a lot of talking, as all of you know. I want to turn it over to you all. Maybe this is a time where you want to bring up a specific issue that you're having. We've got several people from NextGear here that can assist. If you want to talk a little bit more about some of the reports that we looked at inside of that database, we have time to have some Q&A regarding some of the things that we presented today. So I want to kind of open the doors for everyone to be able to ask some questions that you may have regarding some of the material that we presented, or we can go down some rabbit holes if that's what we're comfortable doing as well. So by all means, ask away.
Hey, Chad, you're on mute.
I am on mute, so let me take a quick step back.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Beth. So some of the items you're seeing here under this management dashboard, the time to complete, time to contact. So these are all the sub-reports that made up that dashboard that we were looking at a little earlier. You can actually go into each one of those and see the data, the specific jobs that make up that. We also have some reports here, like budget and revenue comparison, some digital marketing ROI, marketing leads. That aging report that I showed you, that was actually found under this Ivan Pulse report. But all of these should be available, and Beth, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. All of these should be made available to people that have the BI tool in their database. We should be making those available to you inside of your BI section. So anything that looks like this, it'll be added by the system admin right around October of this year. All of these reports should be inside of your database. Okay. All right, so some other questions have come in. I noticed on the database you were using as an example, there was a tab for accounting notes. Is that something that can be added? I believe that, Tracy, is in reference to a future tool that's coming out. This person may be piloting that. I'll need to double check on that accounting notes. I assume you're referring to here. Yeah, I don't think that that's going to be available just yet for the masses, but I'll double check on that and let you know. Another question, can you please show me how you got to the BI reporting tool? Yes, I absolutely can. So the BI reporting tool can be found here in the reports section. So if I hover over reports, you should see an option here labeled BI reporting. And then when you click here, that will take you to this screen. Now, if you are not seeing that and you know that you are currently paying for BI reporting, you need to make sure and go and turn that on in the security section of your database. While we're here, that can be found in administration, employee security settings. And then there's a section here, you can go group security or security. I won't get into those specific details, but that would be found in the report section. So you would need to make sure that that BI reporting section is turned on for you to be able to have that option inside of this report section. Okay. What other questions do we have? And like I said, if there's a specific report that you want to look at, if there's a specific item that you may have questions on, hey, how would you recommend implementing this? Joseph and I have seen a lot in our years of training organizations. So this is a perfect time to ask. We still have plenty of time to go through those should any of you have questions. while I'm waiting for other questions, another nice tool. Is the BI option available now? Yes, it is. And if you're interested in BI, like I mentioned, there is an additional fee for the BI tool. If you want information on that BI tool, here's an email address that you can reach out to. It is events@nextgearsolutions.com. Events@nextgearsolutions.com. Send an email to that address, and they will point you in the right direction on how to get more information on the BI report tool. Okay. Do you build out custom BI reports, or do we need to do that? So James, we can build out some. As you've seen, you'll already have some preloaded in your BI tool, but you have the ability of creating your own. We have training materials at your disposal for the BI tool where you can learn how to create your own. And we do have a member that is not seeing those reports in BI yet. Those should be available relatively soon. And I will find out if there's someone that you should be contacting if they are not showing up, but they may not be in there just yet. We had these loaded into this database just for this presentation, so it may take a few days. But yes, the expectation is those will be in your BI section relatively soon. It may be a week or so before they show up. Yeah, so bear with us. Those should be in your section in a few days. But yeah, they're not there just yet for everyone. How do you pull the cycle report? So once again, that cycle report that I was showing during the presentation a little earlier, once again, that's found inside of that BI section. And the report that I specifically was looking at, there's actually a dashboard. So I had a dashboard created. So we're in the reports tab now. If you go into the dashboard section, we'll let that load. There is a management dashboard here that's been created called the management cycle time dashboard. And so you have the ability, once again, I'm not trying to sell you on BI, but the number of things that you can do here are pretty cool. So you can actually create reports and then convert those reports into graphs that look like this. So instead of me having to parse through an Excel spreadsheet, which you have the ability of doing inside of BI as well, you can take that data and make it in graph form, which I think is a pretty cool way of looking at this. Are you guys updating the BI reports with some degree of frequency? I'm sure needs will arise through input of users. I wouldn't say that we are going to be updating the ones that we're creating. Now, you'll have the ability of updating. Like I mentioned, you'll have the ability of creating your own should you need to. But yeah, as needs come out, if there are requests that are made, I'm not going to make promises on the behalf of anyone on my team about building reports for anyone. But we can definitely hear people out to see if there are some reports that we think the entire network could benefit from. That's kind of like what we're doing right now. We've created some reports that we think would be beneficial and passing them down. As we do more of these type of pulse type of events, there could be more BI reports added into your section, but I'm not going to say that there is a standard time frame in which we are adding or editing the existing BI reports inside of your database. And I should mention, James made a comment. We built out some complex Excel reports. Just know that you can take all of the data that you're seeing in BI and you can export it out to Excel. But one of the cool things about the BI report is you actually don't have to use Excel as much, because anything you can do in Excel, you can pretty much do inside of the BI section, whether it's pivot tables, conditional formatting is available inside of BI as well. I actually had an example of that in another one here. So you can do conditional formatting. So for example, this report is set up to where if a gross profit is over a certain threshold, it's green. If it's under, it goes red. So that can be pretty cool as well, because that's stuff that Excel can do too. And yes, Taryn, that email address, once again, for those of you that have interest in the BI reports, is events@nextgearsolutions.com. Events@nextgearsolution.com. And Wilson, I'm afraid I do not know the answer to that question. If someone else on my team does, he's asked the engine behind the BI tool. I am afraid I am not privy to that information, at least at this point in time. Okay. And Wilson, John responded to you, but for those of you that also might have been interested in the engine, Izinda is our BI engine for our BI reporting. We still have time for additional questions should anyone have them. Now, another, while I'm waiting to see if we have any final questions here, there is another section that can be useful to you. You know, Joseph talked a little bit about compliance a little while ago. Another section that you can go to as opposed to the job level for compliance. Always remember that the company-wide compliance manager is available to you in this More tab. So if you want to get an idea of what are we not doing from a compliance perspective, what is currently due inside of my organization, that can always lead you to get an understanding of what steps of the process may be falling between the cracks. Okay. You know, if I'm seeing a lot of things that are overdue and they're late for several days, this can be a good way to gauge, maybe this is something that I should investigate a little bit further because I see that my team is currently struggling to capture that information. So that can always be another good way for you to kind of investigate inside of your database. Now, another thing that I should point out regarding all the BI reports that we've been pointing out, remember that data conversation that we had earlier. You know, whether you're data deficient, data driven, please understand that the availability of the data on the reports that we're showing you are completely contingent on the data that's inside of your database, because the BI reports that we have put in or are going to be putting in are built around some specific filters that may have some specific components. So if you don't currently capture that piece of information, please understand that at this point in time, that BI report is not going to be very useful to you. So just understand that we did try to do as best we could with creating the parameters around those BI reports, but please understand that your data is going to play the largest role in the availability of some of those reports. And someone's asked a question, if I have time, can I explain work orders? So I can definitely explain them. I don't think it would be a good use of everyone's time to go through the work order process. If that's something that you would be interested in, we do have some training opportunities for you. But Amy, work orders is a way for you to take an estimate and convert it into a budget, right? And so Dash has the ability to take an estimate from Xactimate and convert it into a budget of based on how the estimate was written, right? So how much do we have allocated for drywall, painting, plumbing, electrical, etc. And then the project manager or estimator, whoever would do this in your organization, has the ability of determining, hey, we're going to be doing this in-house, or we're going to pay a subcontractor X amount of dollars to do this. You could even set it up to where a subcontractor could only be assigned, assuming we have their W-9, their master sub agreement, any type of paperwork that we require from a subcontractor. It allows the project manager to budget the job before it begins, which is a really, really best practice that we recommend in the industry. But because before you begin, it's a good idea to know what we stand to make on this job before that first nail is driven. And so this allows us to have reporting as well. From a management perspective, we have the ability of seeing, hey, from a global perspective, how much do we stand to make on our reconstruction losses, assuming they go according to plan. And so that's another data point that we have the ability of having. You know, there's also a purchase order component that can be tied into the work orders where we can lock in the amount that we're paying a subcontractor, and then accounting can approve that once the invoice comes in from the subcontractor. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds on that process, but there's a lot that can be done with the work order component, but it's really around structure with your reconstruction. Because the way I look at it in this industry, you have so little time to plan for anything. But on the reconstruction side, that's the one time you get a chance to plan out what's going to happen. And so taking the time to get an understanding of what's going to happen, how much we stand to make, assuming we've got everything written out correctly in the estimate, taking that time can really be beneficial for your margins. Yeah, so good question from Wilson. Going to the compliance manager will bring non-compliance issues into a table form. Would BI allow me to graph by individual so I can show on a screen how each individual is doing? Yeah, there is the ability of even graphing by a VPAS score. Not sure how familiar you are with VPAS inside of BI. This user may have a graph in here for that already. I don't know, but let's see. But there is the ability of graphing at an individual level from a a VPAS and compliance level, which is, let's see if this has anything. I'm just kind of flying blind now. I haven't looked at this prior. No, so there's not a lot here. But yes, to answer your question, Wilson, you do have the ability of building individual level compliance reports where I have the ability of seeing how an individual is performing from a VPAS perspective. You can even do line graphs to see your VPAS score was at this point on this month, it went up or it went down. So yeah, there's a lot of things you can do with that information. Where do you find more information on BI reporting? Beth, I saw that we were having some issues with that email address. Can you confirm the email address that they need to reach out to regarding BI?
Yes, so I actually have someone in marketing checking out the events at nextgearsolutions.com. If that does get kicked back, it's not supposed to, please feel free to send it to Beth, BETH.Thompson, THOMPSON at nextgearsolutions.com. Make sure you're putting an S on the end of solutions. Sometimes that's a mishap.
Perfect, thank you for that. So how can I drill into the DASH method for job budgeting? So one thing that I would direct you to, George, and this is for anyone, we do offer some role-based type webinars on a weekly basis. So in this training opportunity section of help and training, there is, I would go to the role-based webinar descriptions. And so the one specifically that I would point you to for work orders is the GM Estimator PM Management Tools Part 2. And so this will get into work orders and purchase orders. Now to sign up for those, just go back to this help and training. And then there are some instructions on how you can go about signing up for those. Right here where it says sign up for role-based webinars, there would be some instructions on how to go about doing that. But yeah, before you can implement work orders, you need to know how they work inside of this organization. So that would definitely be one of the first steps that I take. Now, if you want a little bit faster to get some information, you can always type in work orders, for example, and there are manuals and videos on how to access that level of information. But there's an instructor-led webinar held weekly on that particular topic that I think can be very helpful to you as well. The webinar would definitely get into more of the theory and best practices. The videos would kind of show you the nuts and bolts of how the components work inside of the application. Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns, thoughts? Want to make sure we have plenty of time to ask questions if you have them. And like I said, we can go anywhere inside of the application. If you've got some thoughts or you want some direction on how would you recommend implementing something, this is a good audience to have that conversation with. So I'll give it another minute or two to see if we have questions come in, or else we'll adjourn. So while I'm waiting for one last final question or two to come in, just in closing, a few things to kind of take away. I know I've thrown a lot of information at you. If you don't take anything else away, just remember that the integrity of your data is the most important component to all of this, right? To make good decisions, I have to have good information to base those decisions off of. And so having processes in place about how you're going to use this application or whatever application you're using is imperative. Make sure your people have an understanding of what their responsibilities are, what they're responsible for inside of this application. So that way, when I see that something's not being done inside of this program, I know who to go to, right? I know who to hold responsible for that, because then I'm not able to do my job if I don't have the information that I need to make those decisions. Have a plan in place for what you want to use this program for, because then when you're trying to use your data, you need to have an expectation of how to capture that. Can we access this video? Beth, did we record this? Are we making those available?
Yes, we are. Those will be, all of our webinars from this week will be available on our website by the end of next week. It does take time because we do have 8 webinars. We'll edit and upload those to our website next week. All attendees will receive an email once those are up on the site and ready to view.
Perfect. Thank you. Good question, Wilson. Glad you've glad you found this valuable to show it to some other members of your staff. Okay, one last call for questions, anyone? All right. Well, I thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate the questions. There was a lot of involvement and engagement. That's always good to see when we have a presentation like this, especially with a big crowd. We do thank you for your time. Hopefully you got something out of this. Like Beth mentioned, we will make the videos and the recordings available to you on our website. Give us about a week or so to get that. Give us a little bit of time on those BI reports inside of your database as well. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us regarding BI in the event that you want some more information on it. It's a wonderful tool, assuming you have the data to back it up, right? So if you're in a place where I don't really have good data right now inside of my system, maybe you want to wait just a little bit before you use BI, because you're really not going to be able to benefit from the power that it has until you've got a hold on the data that you're trying to collect. Okay, so once again, thank you so much for your time, everyone. Y'all have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.